No BS Nutrition keeps opening the fridge and staring, and we're not mad about it.
This is a 1-hour food fight against diet culture and its fake science messages.
Instead, we're passionate about celebrating real wellness.
I'm registered dietitian Hannah McGee.
And I'm neuroscience PhD student Tareq Youssef, and this is No BS Nutrition. I feel like not a lot has changed for the, I don't know, in our lives or something, but I just feel like there's been a lot of ideas moving around for the podcast recently. We've just been working on a lot.
Yeah, totally. We're throwing around a lot of different ideas and trying some new things out, like last week.
Last week. But there's also a lot of news coming out. We talked a little bit about this, but not even new. I guess just things we might talk about on the podcast, but even things a little bit away from that. You and I were talking a little bit about the Bon Appetit editor-in-chief stepping down because of blackface. And have you ever, did you used to watch the Bon Appetit videos a lot?
No, not a lot.
Okay, so I, in the early days, watched them a lot because it was kind of fun. It also seemed a lot more rinky-dinky, maybe over a year ago. And then you could really see the production value really stepped up later on. And for some reason, I kind of dropped off watching because something about it seemed different. I don't know if it was less genuine or something, but then Adam Rappaport, the editor-in-chief who's stepping down because of blackface, he started coming on the videos sometimes, and something about his personality was so... I don't know. If there's any frat boys listening, I'm sure you're cool, but something I'm not going to make any friends when I say listening. This. But something about him seemed so jocular. You know what I mean?
I know what you
standoffish and anyway, that I'm almost is this terrible to say? I'm not surprised he made a terrible decision with respect to treating other people with respect. That makes complete sense. He seemed like a really privileged white man on video.
Right. There's definitely people that give off that vibe, that you wouldn't be surprised if something surfaced that was really offensive or shady. Yeah.
And then the news that the non-white editors don't get compensated for their videos.
Oh my God, yeah. That's just disgusting.
I couldn't believe it. But so there's been that stuff's come out. We've gotten some great referrals to BSs of the week from friends and listeners. Yes. I have no skin left on my body. My psoriasis is 10 out of 10 acting up right now. There's just a lot going on.
No, never mind. We're not going to get into that. I was going to ask you how you treat your psoriasis.
Lots of prayer. I actually, you know what? You know how lately I've been saying I haven't really been prioritizing my own health. I've been saying that a lot on podcasts. It's it's true because my skin's falling off. But I'm trying. I'm covered in oatmeal stains right now. That's all I can think about. Anyway, this has been a great intro.
Does that have to do with your psoriasis?
No. That's just another wonderful facet of my life. All of the colors of the rainbow of my everyday.
Right.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. Nothing really new with me. I definitely have a tickle in my throat right now, so that's annoying.
Yeah, that is annoying.
I'm going to drink some water so that you guys can hear me okay. But yeah, otherwise, not too much is new with me. Same old. I'm boring.
Same old. We're both doing, you're doing winter white.
I'm wearing winter white. Thanks, Mom.
I'm doing white. Just plain white.
Yeah. We're twinning.
We're twinning, and I think everyone's on the edge of their seats waiting for a BS of the week, Hannah.
Okay, so let me jump into that. I'm actually on my laptop right now trying to bring something up that I forgot to bring up. It was actually in our DMs on our Instagram account.
Everyone's obsessed with us.
So, totally. So, let me just go here. We had someone write in to us after our episode on food sensitivity tests. And it was a listener, a friend of the pod, Bianca. Shout out to you. She
Bianca!
She gave me permission to use her name. So
Okay. I love. Oh my God, Bianca! It means white. Okay, we're on theme in Italian.
Okay, amazing. But she sent in a little story about something that happened to her. So I'm going to, and it ties into my BS of the week. So I'm going to read it out because she gave me permission to read it on the podcast.
Thank you, Bianca.
Yes, thank you, Bianca. So she said that she had listened to the food sensitivity episode, why you should not get a food sensitivity test. And she wanted to say that she was sucked into paying $500 for a food sensitivity test. And then...
By the way, if you're listening and not watching on YouTube, my jaw just dropped.
Yeah. Okay, wait. Sorry. Let me just... I'm going to read it straight from the DMs. Sorry. She was almost sucked into paying $500 for a food sensitivity test. And instead was talked into doing a live blood analysis test that still cost about $100 and also proved to be a mistake. Apart from the fact that seeing your blood particles move live on a big screen, apart from seeing your blood particles live on a big screen, the takeaway message I got from this appointment was a huge pamphlet stating the foods that were to be consumed plentifully versus avoided completely based solely on her blood type.
Okay.
So she says her avoid list for her blood type O positive was full of her absolute favorite foods. So this is her avoid list.
Universal donor. Go Bianca.
Yeah, so avocado, coconut, almonds, salmon, etc. All these foods that she loves, she was told to avoid based on her blood type. She says, needless to say, I left that appointment feeling overwhelmed and confused. I tried to follow the chart for a couple weeks in hopes of curing my autoimmune disease like the lady had promised, but after a while I became more miserable than anything.
Yeah.
3 years later, I'm able to recognize how much BS that test was and how irresponsible it was of that practitioner to banish me from eating those healthy foods that I loved.
How awful.
Anyways, she goes, sorry for the novel, but I just wanted to share that story.
No, we love that novel.
Yeah. So we love it. So this is what I want to talk about today. Thank you to Bianca for bringing it up, but I want to address the blood type diet.
Also, before everyone slides into the DMs, I just realized O positive is not universal donor, O negative is universal donor.
Yeah, when you said that, I was like, I don't know my blood types 100%, but I'm pretty sure that's wrong. But I just let it slide.
No, I was wrong.
Okay, so I'm going to address the blood type diet, and basically, I mean, it's pretty straightforward from the title, but it's you have certain nutrition recommendations based on your blood type. So the blood type diet has actually been around since I think 1996 actually, and it's based off a book written by when I first read about it, actually, it said a physician, but then when I read some more, it said a naturopathic physician, so I'm not sure if he's a medical doctor or a naturopath. But anyways, the book is called Eating for Your Type by Dr. Peter D'Adamo. And proponents of this diet, like I said, suggest that your blood type determines...
Peter.
Peter. Are we lagging a little bit, or was that just a delayed response to his
last name? I think it was just a delayed response.
Okay. I just want to make sure. So, like I said, this diet basically suggests that your blood type determines which foods are best for your health. Now, I mean, obviously, just hearing that, it sounds pretty crazy.
It's like, where are you getting these ideas?
Yeah. So, basically, this idea came from, some studies do suggest that certain blood types are associated with increased risks of certain illnesses.
Okay.
But that's it. That is the only sort of scientific evidence related to blood type and disease.
Oh, I see. So if you link cardiovascular disease risk with one blood type, you might suggest low cholesterol foods or something like that.
Sure, yeah. But this diet is like so many other things we've talked about. It's literally just this one kind of science-based fact that practitioners just take
they took it to the
run.
Extreme. Yeah,
exactly. So so the idea that your blood type can predict how you react to certain foods or how you metabolize foods is totally not based in any sort of evidence. There's nothing to show that based on your blood type you metabolize animal proteins this way, or based on your blood type, you metabolize carbohydrates this way. There's totally, like, that's just BS. So, like, hold on, let me see here. Okay, so I just wanted to read off some examples of the recommendations. So those with type O blood should choose high protein foods and eat lots of meat. And then to lose weight, they should eat seafood, kelp, red meat, broccoli, spinach, whatever, like the list goes on. And then those with type A blood should choose fruit, vegetables, tofu, turkey, and whole grains, but avoid meat. So like beef and whatever. Yeah, exactly. And then those with type B blood, pick a diverse diet, including meat, fruit, dairy, seafood, and grains. It all sounds like there's just like very specific foods that are cut out.
You know what this diet is? This diet is type BS. Okay?
Yes,
you're welcome.
Absolutely. Love it. So, and some of so those are just like some food recommendations, but the blood type diet actually like extends beyond food as well. They recommend certain like lifestyle changes depending on your blood type as well. So like people with type O blood are advised to choose like high intensity aerobic exercise versus like low intensity, walking or things like that. And also based on your blood type, this book recommends like certain supplements and things like that, which is just ridiculous.
And like obviously not citing any clinical trials or anything throughout.
Exactly. So what I've read, I found an article from Harvard Health on the blood type diet, and it basically said like back when this book came out and when the blood type diet was created, there were no like high quality studies whatsoever about eating for your blood type. Nothing published. Like this was just like this guy just like took that one fact about like your risk for certain diseases and blood type and kind of ran with it. So and then even now, if you do a search like in the literature for something about blood type diet, there's next to nothing. There is like a couple studies. So there's a 2013 study that analyzed all the literature on this type of diet and found like nothing demonstrating any sort of benefit from the blood type diet. And then there was a 2014 study that found that some people following any of the blood type diets, so based on their own blood type, they did have some improvement in certain cardiometabolic risk factors, but these improvements were not related to blood type. They were just related to the fact that these people were eating healthier diets.
And like exercising.
Like they were eating healthier foods and exercising. Exactly. So nothing to do with like because they were type O, they were eating these foods. It was just because they were in general making healthier lifestyle choices because of the diet.
There is that theme, I think, that you brought up that we've talked about before that we keep coming across in a lot of what we talk about is like someone takes one like half truth and then runs with it to the extreme, and that this is definitely a really good example of that.
Yeah, and another example of that is like you can listen to our food sensitivity test episode, but how these IgG food sensitivity tests, they do tell you like what your IgG antibody levels are for certain foods. So like that fact is true, but it's in the like interpretation of your IgG levels where it goes wrong.
I really want to say thank you to Bianca too for sharing her story. And to me, I wonder if it was even a trick where they offered the more expensive test first and then offered the less expensive test afterwards. And then it
just like as a plan
makes
B.
it more like, oh, I guess I can afford this one. Like I'll do the less expensive one, which is such a nasty trick. And I'm really curious about like seeing the blood cells on video. Like, was that real or was that a pre-recorded video? You know what I mean? Like a lot of this sounds kind of shady.
Well, it's just like these.
And why would you need to visualize the blood cells just to see the type? Like there's a lot of really fast
I don't know, I'm not
tests.
Sure like I this is one thing about like Bianca's message. I wasn't 100% sure if like maybe it was something like I don't know why the blood analysis was done.
Regardless, it does seem like those kinds of practitioners are out to basically take people's money and not give them fair like knowledge in return. And I appreciate Bianca sharing that story, and I hope if anyone else gets like pressured into something like that they reconsider it.
Right. And like Bianca said, like she realizes how irresponsible it was of this practitioner, whoever it was, to recommend like she, one, like do these tests, and two, cut out all of these like nutritious foods that Bianca loved just like because of this stupid blood type diet that has no scientific evidence behind it.
And to claim that they would like cure whatever autoimmune disease that someone
or
has.
like help her symptoms. Yeah. Ridiculous.
Wow. That is total BS.
Total BS.
BS?
Yeah.
Check.
Yeah. BS of the week. Check.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah.
Thanks to that naturopath for being an absolute terrible person and helping us tell your story.
I don't know if it was a naturopath, but like she never actually specified that it was a naturopath. But, or you mean like the naturopath that created the diet?
Oh, both. I mean, I hope it wasn't a physician who did that blood test.
No, I'm sure it wasn't. But anyways.
Wow, that's really interesting. Actually, really interesting. There is obviously a lot of connection between the BS story, the BS of the week that you had, and kind of what I want to talk about this week. Not just based on nutrition, but also based on kind of blood testing and getting information about that and recommending diets. So for everybody listening, this is going to be like a kind of a different episode. Hannah and I each have our own kind of like mini topic that we want to talk about today, both kind of like relevant to the time. So maybe I'll jump in to mine.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think that, I like, just to preface what we're going to talk about, it's kind of like nutrition news, or almost like some new developments in the nutrition world that we both want to talk about today. I think we might try to make this like every so often. We kind of update you guys on some things that are going on in the nutrition world.
I would love to be a news anchor.
You know, evidence-wise. Oh yeah,
I would love to be a news anchor. It seems so glamorous. Like behind the desk, you get handed like emergency happens. They like hand you a piece of paper. You're like, this just in.
Breaking news.
I'd love to do that. Okay. So my kind of nutrition news came from, just like looking to see what's been happening lately in the nutrition science world, in the dietetics world. And I came across this article by a journalist called Nikki Hancocks, who's actually a very nice person that we talked to a little bit. And she wrote a great article on nutraingredients.com, and obviously we'll link it below like we usually do, about this study that actually just came out in the journal Nature Medicine, which is a pretty high-ranking journal. A lot of people read it. A lot of people cite it. It publishes some really, really large studies. And the study that we're going to be talking about today is called the PREDICT study. So the actual journal article, the scientific article that came out, is called Human Postprandial Responses to Food and Potential for Precision Nutrition. So by Barry and colleagues, and it just came out like a few days ago, like the whole study.
A couple, like on Friday.
Yeah, it just came out. So I'm kind of going to break down this study, talk a little bit about it, and talk about the news that came out around it. And of course, one of the people who covered this news was Nikki Hancocks. Okay, so these are kind of preliminary studies from this PREDICT study, which is going to be ongoing. And they're investigating individual nutritional responses to normal meals. So nutritional responses are like how high your blood sugar spikes, levels of triglyceride in the body, things like that. So we're going to talk about all these results that came out. So they want to predict the individual's food responses based on things like, the kind of bacteria that's in your gut. And the long-term goal is to take all that information that they get out of the study and create a home test, like a blood test or whatever, and an app that helps you figure out which foods will optimize your metabolism, improve long-term health, and they also say they want to help manage weight. Okay, so the study's director is Tim Spector. He's at the Department of Twin Research. So they also studied a bunch of twins at King's College in collaboration with a bunch of other universities, Harvard, Stanford. And they also are collaborating with a nutrition science company called, it's ZOE, for American listeners, it's Zoe. So I don't know if it's Zoe or Zoe, but I'm going to say Zoe.
Right.
So actually,
Okay.
Hannah, I'm going to send you the link to this Zoe company so you can look at it live on the air with me as we talk about it. So on the website, one of the first...
Oh, wait, you didn't send... Oh, wait,
one of
yes,
the first things that
Sorry.
one of the first things that it says is they want to reduce dietary inflammation and allow you to be at your healthiest weight. Okay, so immediately everyone listening, we're all, everyone's like rolling their eyes a little bit.
What the hell is dietary inflammation?
Yeah, right. So it's a lot of these buzzwords about like bad nutrition health. And of course, one of their biggest goals is to help manage weight. This Zoe app, these creators of this Zoe app that are working in collaboration with the Predict study researchers. Okay, so you can actually sign up for early access to their home test, which includes, I think, like a blood test, a stool sample, etc., and get your personalized eating plan depending on your responses to food. Okay, so they actually have a disclaimer on their website too, which is a great start, saying that they can't treat diseases. Great disclaimer, but rather they want to identify. Sorry, if you're watching on YouTube, I am trying to pick an eyelash out of my eye. Okay, I really have to tell listeners, if you want the full experience, you have to watch us on YouTube because it's just another, it's all other thing. Okay.
Yeah.
But rather they want to identify foods that reduce body inflammation, whatever that means, after meals. Well, I mean, it does mean a bunch of things, like if you want to look for inflammatory markers, but we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah, but inflammation is such a buzzword.
Exactly,
and
they're definitely using buzzwords.
Half the people who use it don't even know what it means.
So on the Zoe website itself, it says, one of the claims that they make, by the way, with no citation at all, it says, genes don't determine your weight. I think on this podcast, we've talked about a lot of evidence that supports the contrary of that, okay? They also say counting calories doesn't work. Okay, cool.
Okay.
We're back on board. They also say you are unique, so your food should be personal to you. And I think probably to some extent that is true, but maybe not to the extent that they're making us worried about it.
I agree.
So they say your responses to food can improve. Maybe... I would say probably true with regular movement and healthy eating. If you have bad responses to food, they can improve. But I don't know if you can improve something that's already normal. We can't boost ourselves. I think this app is trying to, reach a place where it says they're trying to boost your responses to food. So apparently you can eat what they call their, quote, famous muffins, do a blood test, and do a stool sample, offer a stool sample, and keep a food diary. You send it in, you get back a 4-week meal plan, use their app to track your meals. I thought counting calories didn't count, but I guess tracking your overall macronutrients is a close second, according to them. Okay. So it seems like we're getting close to calorie counting. Anyway, so basically it's a lot of like the food you eat informs whether or not you have good or bad bacteria, different sugar responses that are going to result in inflammation. And this is going to influence how you metabolize fat and sugar. And I guess they're trying to say they're going to, help you combat weight gain to some extent. So the Zoe website actually has no evidence linked with basically all their claims. And they're saying they're busting nutrition myths that genes determine weight. And again, I have a big problem with that because there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later because the actual journal article that just came out also talks a little bit about the genetic influence of responses to food. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. I think this is just
it's all going to come a little bit full circle. So, okay, let's talk about the actual Predict study. So the article that was published in Nature Medicine. So they want to personalize nutrition because they say nutrition guidelines are based on a population average, not the individual. That is true. So they got 1,102 healthy adults, some of which were pairs of twins from the US and the UK. And they were recruited with the purpose of measuring postprandial responses to food. That just means after a meal, like after lunch. And they gave them standardized meals, like meals that the researchers developed to analyze responses after those meals, So they standardized the meals, basically. Sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying that.
Okay.
And it was a 2-week-long study. So they wanted to measure metabolic responses. So like I said before, blood triglycerides, blood glucose, and insulin levels. So they did that at a clinic visit on day 1. And they also did 13 days post-clinic visit where people did this at home. So they also measured like other markers of insulin levels to meals. And the meals were standardized, like I said, but they also mixed up the meals, so they would differ the fat and carb composition and measure different metabolic responses at multiple points after the meal. The participants also wore sleep monitors, physical activity monitors, basically to try to get as much data as possible to how the body was reacting to the food. They also provided stool samples. And they also used this Zoe app to log their meals. They took a picture of their meal, a nutritionist who was part of the study. They did have one registered dietitian as part of the study. The rest were, if not physicians, were PhD researchers. And that team kind of reviewed those pictures on the Zoe app. So what were the overall findings?
Okay.
So they say in their own discussion of their paper that genetic influence on the metabolic responses after a meal were lower than expected. Okay, so I think the claim on the Zoe website got carried away with this, taking the fact that genetic influences might have been lower than expected for post-meal metabolic responses and jumping all the way to saying that it doesn't relate to weight. I think that is not 1 + 1 = 2. You cannot claim that genetics don't influence weight just from a result that says genetics don't influence post-meal metabolic responses to a couple of different metabolic measures.
Right.
That does not
absolutely.
equate. So I really do have a big problem with the Zoe app claiming that on their website, and the Zoe app being like connected to this study, like they're connected to these researchers. So I think that's a big jump for them to make. So taking a look at the data as well. So maybe it's true genetic influence is kind of was kind of low, but I think that's a generalization that they make, and we're going to kind of dig into that a little bit. Meal timing, so when you actually ate, and the composition of your meal, how many carbs, how much fat, had an effect on predicting mostly blood triglyceride levels. Okay, so the levels of like fat basically in the blood. So they say there is power in measuring these things because measures of blood triglyceride and glucose concentrations can be really informative for predicting impaired glucose intolerance and things like cardiovascular disease risk. So they're saying like it's good for us to measure these things and see these connections because it can inform us about long-term health possibly. And an interesting thing that they say is that person to person, they saw that these measures were very variable. So you and I might have completely different responses to foods, but the individual has pretty consistent enough responses that they can predict my response accurately and your response accurately because of our different reliable responses after meals. So that was an interesting thing to come out of that for sure. So looking at the data, it does seem like in the 6 hours after a meal, triglycerides, glucose, and insulin levels, yes, they did vary person to person. But I would say just looking at the data, most people seem to follow the same trend. Yes, there were some differences, but not so many people were outliers, like completely off of the average level that it was so concerning. Yes, there were people off of the average, but not that many people. And this is just like judging by eye. Of course, they did a bunch of statistical analysis on this that goes much deeper. But it does raise a curiosity about why we're making blanket statements. Even triglyceride levels were most of the time within 1 to 2 points apart from each other when looking at the all of the the data of all the different people, the over 1,000 people. And guess what? Genetics was actually the second biggest predictor of glucose levels after a meal. So it seems like a really big overgeneralization to make that genetics are not a strong predictor of post-meal metabolic responses.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so their argument was that we need individualized predictions and recommendations. That may be true, but I think it's probably only necessary if someone has responses that are huge outliers. And I think these could be flagged in other ways without having the whole population download the Zoe app and do meal responses. I think there's other ways to flag people who have really outlying responses to meals. So on that same note, meal composition and context, so the timing of the meals, really only substantially predicted glucose levels, along with genetics, in the top 3. But they weren't substantially better predictors than genetics when it came to triglyceride levels or insulin. So again, it seemed like a really big overgeneralization for the study and for the Zoe app to make that genetics were not a big big predictor of these metabolic responses, and that they're saying that meal composition and timing were so much better at predicting these responses. They weren't most of the time. So I was initially stumped with this because, stumped with these overgeneralizations that they were making, because after the intermittent fasting episode that we did, we talked a lot about how it's not when you eat necessarily, but it's what you eat that's important. So I was like, and we saw that there was a really huge importance of genetics on the health outcomes, of different, whatever meals you were having. Genetics did have an important role. So to see the sweeping generalizations that they were making, that genetics weren't important, I was kind of ready for a revolution by looking at their data, but I wasn't revolutionized. I think the bigger achievement was that when you look at all of the measures together, genetics, meal context, so the timing of the meals, the composition of the meals, how much fat, how many carbs, the gut bacteria from the stool samples, blood pressure, age, sex, etc. So when they took all that information and they fed it to their machine learning computer algorithm, they were able indeed to strongly predict some post-meal metabolic responses. And the one that they were able to predict most strongly was glucose. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, that data might be helpful for a lot of people. A lot of patients who maybe have metabolic disorders or maybe are diabetics, to be able to predict blood glucose depending on different things might be really helpful. Okay, so the thing that they were able to predict most strongly was glucose. I think that's really interesting. So they were able, they achieved a lot with this study, and this I think was one of the biggest achievements, is that they were able to take a lot of different factors and feed it into a machine learning computer algorithm and predict some factors. To my, and I'll say untrained eye anyway, triglycerides and insulin levels weren't that substantially well correlated as compared to glucose. So glucose was, I think the factor that they could predict best. So I don't know. I feel like there was a lot of overgeneralizations coming out of this study. The authors also realized that there was scope for improvement for their algorithms. They say that more varied meals, different contextual factors might be helpful for getting better results in predicting these different metabolic responses. And they also agree that predicting post-meal glucose was easier than triglyceride and insulin. So I was happy that I saw that, and then I read it. I was like, okay, we're on the same, we're agreeing on this thing anyway.
Right.
And one of their things was, they said that the technology for measuring triglycerides and insulin actually needs to improve, and maybe that would help their studies in the future. So I do believe them when they say that it's a very comprehensive assessment of metabolic responses. They obviously did a lot of work. It warranted a really big publication, really impressive. I've never contributed to something that big. But as I said, some things seem like they were being overplayed, especially with their gut microbiome assessment. it ended up only predicting less than 10% of the triglyceride and glucose responses. So it wasn't a huge predictor of anything. I don't really see how at this point any of the outcomes that they managed to achieve are going to help people manage their weight very easily. I guess they want to help people make meals that will, I don't know, lower blood and fat levels in the blood sugar and fat levels, but meal composition was only significantly predictive of, or substantially predictive of glucose anyway.
Right.
Not triglycerides or insulin levels. So
That's
maybe that's a start. And they do cite a study, for example, where in one person, a banana might result in higher sugar levels in someone compared to a cookie, but it can be opposite for the other person. Like the cookie will result in higher blood sugar for me, but not the banana. But for you, it might be the banana and not the cookie. So there are individual responses to different meal compositions. That's true. So I guess they're kind of on that same note, trying to better predict these outcomes. But I'm not sure at this point this is enough to, like their claim says, help manage weight. It also doesn't focus on a well-rounded lifestyle that involves like healthy eating and exercise in general, which is, that is worrying as well. And as Nikki Hancocks cites in her article, the results weren't always clear-cut. Even the microbiome results, like I mentioned, weren't that exciting. She suggests that they even mentioned, she wrote that the authors even talked about how, in a separate setting, talked about how the quality of food was a better predictor of healthy gut bacteria than the kind of food itself. So, like, it didn't matter whether you were eating red meat or poultry or fish. It was more the quality of the red meat, the poultry, and the fish that was a predictor of having healthy gut bacteria.
That's interesting.
And at the end of the day, they were like, eat fiber and consume healthy foods. You know what I mean? So they're kind of... Anyway, so... Suffice to say, I think there were a lot of overgeneralizations. Still, the study was really, they got out a lot of good data. And they're actually running a second study now. So there's bound to be a lot more information.
Right.
So that's kind of the PREDICT study.
I'm curious, like, what they're hoping... Like, how would they implement... So, based on what they found, how would they implement that into, like, individualized... care and like recommendations, like so
based on, I guess, like the at-home test kit, they would be able to get a bunch of measures from people to their standardized meal, which would be their muffin. They would throw that into their algorithm, their machine learning computer algorithm, which would spit out, okay, this person needs to eat their lunch a little bit earlier so that their blood sugar doesn't spike, and their meals need to be composed maybe a little bit more of fats rather than carbs in order for them to have the best outcome of gut bacteria and the best outcome of insulin level and the best outcome of triglyceride based on the data that they already have from the PREDICT study.
And that's in tandem with like that app.
Exactly. They would use the Zoe app, just like the participants in the study did. And they would take pictures of their meals. Those would be analyzed, sent back to them for, they would be told, like, you need to add a bit more of this to your meal or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, I mean...
But I really think a lot of the outcomes were overplayed, and it was really interesting. Even Nikki Hancocks' article talked about the same thing. It's like a lot of the outcomes weren't clear-cut, and at the end of the day, the physician's suggestions were like, eat a balanced, healthy meal,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It always ends up coming down to that, like making sure you're eating balanced meals, healthy foods, and then like they didn't mention, but like exercise and things like that. So
yeah, exactly. That's what I have trouble with the most. They don't mention exercise at all. They also really are overgeneralizing that genetics are not a big contributor. In fact, they were to blood sugar levels, and they're really overplaying how much of a role meal composition and context had, when in fact they didn't always have a better predictive power than genetics, in some cases.
Right.
Yeah.
Whew.
I think this study's going to get a lot of press. It just came out.
Yeah.
But I think
have to look out for that.
A lot of journalists are going to run with this, and a lot of, people are going to run with these results.
Right. That was oh my gosh, you did that was amazing how you just
oh my God, you're so sweet. It wasn't too
digested all
bad.
of that and
Okay.
but it was definitely I feel like I need to sit with it. Like I'm just
I think you're going to find the study really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. I think you're going to find the results really interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm really excited for you to look through it.
I am excited too. I'm going to do that.
For people listening, I was kind of telling Hannah not to look at it so that I could talk about it on the podcast and it'd be immediate reaction.
Surprise.
First.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to know what everyone else thinks of this. I don't know if you're listening and you have questions or thoughts, you should write them into us. Send us a DM and.
Yeah, absolutely. I fear that this, like a lot of other things, is kind of marketing itself to everybody rather than just using it as a clinical tool for people who have metabolic diseases or autoimmune disorders. You know what I mean?
To
it's
me,
they're saying everybody can benefit from this and it's going to help you with your weight. I don't think so.
I agree. And that's kind of my issue is if people are already eating for the most part well-balanced meals, regular meals, healthy foods, how much of a difference could taking this test and adjusting your meal composition this much or adjusting your meal timing this much, how much of a difference would that actually make?
Well, from the results, I will say not much of a difference.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. If you're a generally healthy person, you don't have underlying chronic disease, you don't have something that they're looking to treat, but
this is targeting the person who's I wish I could lose 10 pounds. You know what I mean? They're not explicitly saying that, but to me, it's that's who's going to see it and say, oh, this might help me.
That upsets me because everyone wants to lose 10 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. It's
because in today's society, it's you should always be wanting to lose 10 pounds. So
well, we were kind of talking about that with so Kristen Chirico, who does the Empty Suitcase show that we talked about, I think in the previous episode, really awesome show that highlights thin privilege. She tweeted out about how this season of Queer Eye, like the other seasons, seems to be so weight biasy and, if not verges on, just is explicitly fat shamey so much of the time. And I want to love the show so badly, but after reading that tweet, I was you're so right. And now I can't help unsee it. It's to your point, Hannah, everybody wants to lose 10 pounds and people are so glorified for doing it.
Exactly. And I know we talked about this yesterday about Queer Eye, but once you notice it, it's so hard to not notice it. But it just seems whether, what do they call them on Queer Eye? The hero
Fab
or
Five?
the person that they're
they call them
making
something?
over. I thought they had a name for them.
Probably.
Anyways, so the person that they're visiting or that they're transforming, if they've lost a bunch of weight or something, they are super congratulative to them, oh my God, so amazing. And then if they're in if they're in a larger body and they haven't lost weight or something like that, it's very much about dressing to make yourself look thinner,
hide your curves,
and how you can style your hair and cut style your facial hair to make you look slimmer and things like that. And it is very
and it's always
kind of fat shaming
under the guise of we're just highlighting your best features, but why are their best features the ones that make them look smaller?
Right, exactly. It's so ingrained in literally everything.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so my little kind of nutrition development that I wanted to discuss today is actually on a topic that we've already addressed. So it's about intermittent fasting. I actually attended a virtual presentation for the Dietitians of Canada National Conference last week, and it was a really It was a really interesting presentation on intermittent fasting. So it was called Intermittent Fasting, Cure-All or Another Fad Diet, and it was presented by Tanis Fenton, who's a registered dietitian, epidemiologist, and evidence and analyst for PEN, which is, for the dietitians listening, well, if you're in Canada, you'll probably know what that is, but it's essentially like a database called Practice-Based Evidence in Nutrition, and it's where dietitians can go and essentially find like the most recent or like most high quality evidence for certain topics, like that, you know, your client or your patient might be asking you about, or that you want to learn more about. So she analyzes evidence specifically for PEN, and she's also a professor at the University of Calgary and a nutrition research lead at Alberta Health Services. So very, very knowledgeable woman. It was a really, really great presentation. So And I wanted to attend the presentation because, you know, we've talked about intermittent fasting, and I wanted to hear, you know, what she had to say compared to, you know, what I've kind of digested from the evidence. And it was really interesting. And I also want to talk about this because intermittent fasting is just, oh my gosh, it's so trendy. And I just, even when I like shared a little image on my Instagram story that I was attending this presentation, I got a ton of DMs from people saying like, let me know what it says, or like, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting, and like, you know, what did it say? And even when I like gave them what Dr. Tanis Fenton said, people were still like, oh yeah, like it's so confusing, or like, oh, there's so much different information out there. And then even this morning, I was on Instagram and I came across this like influencer from Toronto that I follow, and she's like a pretty big Toronto influencer. She has like, I feel like she has upwards of like 600,000 followers on Instagram, and she's like mainly a fashion blogger, but she was like, she's been doing this like series throughout quarantine where she's going on Instagram Live and having guests and talking about different things, and this was part of her wellness series, and she was interviewing this doctor in Toronto about intermittent fasting. And the first thing that was like a red flag for me is like, this doctor is a pediatrician who specializes in allergies. So she's like a pediatric allergist talking about intermittent fasting for like weight loss in adults. And I was just like, seems like a lateral move. Yeah. Like why are you talking? Stay in your lane. So that was my first red flag, that like a lot of people would not. I mean, I'm saying that as like someone who's not a registered dietitian and not studying nutrition in school. but I, you know what? I'm an example that anybody can learn about nutrition. I'm not saying that I know. No. But I just think like a lot of people wouldn't. I just realized the irony in me saying that. No, it's okay. I think a lot of people wouldn't put that together. Like they would just see doctor promoting intermittent fasting. It's a good thing. They wouldn't see that like this person doesn't specialize in this area and, you know, might not have the most up-to-date evidence, etc. So anyways, they went on to talk about intermittent fasting and like its benefits, and they talked about weight loss, and they talked about like feeling more sharp and like clear, like energy wise. And like this doctor cited like animal studies, essentially like rat studies, where like rats who intermittent fasted like were able to like go through mazes quicker. Right. No, sweetie. No, sweetie. And I'm a basic science person. I work on animals. It's extremely important, but no, sweetie, we can't make that jump. Right. No. Exactly. So that was like, it made me so angry, and I was so riled up when I came on the podcast this morning. So I want to just kind of break down the latest, most recent evidence we have on intermittent fasting and what it says. And so basically, Tanis Fenton went through and she told us she did this like big literature review where she analyzed 4 different systematic reviews and kind of like compiled all the data, and you know, she did the Lord's work. Yes, and she came out with a, you know, some conclusions about intermittent fasting and the research that we have right now. And so the research that she was looking at, or the reviews that she was looking at, she was comparing these to, or like the results to, not just like ad lib or like eating whatever you want when you want. It was to like calorie restricted diets, which is like what we did on our episode. Basically. Yeah. So I'm assuming she used our episode as a primary source. Oh, totally. No. Okay, cool. So like I said, she analyzed 4 systematic reviews, and it was a pretty fascinating presentation. She gave like a little statistics lesson in there, which was like unfortunately a little bit over my head because it's been so long since I've done a stats class, and but it was really helpful, and just kind of goes to show like how in depth she was like going into this topic and into the research.
Sure.
And so the evidence was from like these systematic reviews were, I think the oldest one was from 2018. So they were like 2018, 2019 systematic review studies. So really, really recent. And
comprehensive, recent.
Yeah, very comprehensive, very recent. And she basically found, I'm just trying to summarize this quickly because I don't want to take too long, but
because I blabbed for too long.
No, it was so interesting though. Basically, she found that intermittent fasting compared to like calorie restricted diets was 100% like no better than like for any outcomes. So she looked at so many different outcomes.
So funny.
What? Yeah.
No, I think that's just, it's so funny because it's like, I'm glad she came to that conclusion.
Yeah, so she looked at weight loss, she looked at blood sugar levels, she looked at insulin resistance, she looked at LDL cholesterol, energy expenditure, she looked at maintenance of lean mass versus fat mass, she looked at quality of life, and she looked at adverse effects and psychological adverse effects. So basically she found that for weight loss, blood sugars, insulin resistance, cholesterol, and energy expenditure, there was like no significant difference, no more.
So even the things that we saw in the literature maybe had some promise of like having better outcomes because of intermittent fasting, it still wasn't a substantial difference.
No substantial difference compared to calorie restricted diets. And she actually made that a really great point that like there is a lot of evidence on intermittent fasting. So it's actually really easy to find, like if you're looking for it, to find a study or a couple studies that like demonstrate the outcome that you're looking for. So if you're looking to like correlate intermittent fasting and weight loss, you can probably find a study that will show you that. You can probably find a randomized controlled trial that will show you that. If you're trying to find evidence that intermittent fasting results in lowered LDL cholesterol, you can probably find that. But this is why...
And that's the problem with looking at one study.
Absolutely. So this is why she is like, reviewing these systematic reviews. So these like very comprehensive reviews of multiple randomized control trials. And, she's looking at multiple of these systematic reviews to like compile.
She's at the top of the pyramid.
Absolutely. The top of the evidence hierarchy. Like this is quality like research. This is quality evidence right here. It's not pinpointing or cherry picking a single study and citing your blog post with that. So
lots of people we've talked about before.
And like this doctor that was on this Instagram live. So so like I said, those outcomes that I listed, she saw no significant difference, no better effect compared to calorie restricted diets. And then for things like lean mass and fat mass, so one of the claims about intermittent fasting is that, and we discussed this, like that some people have seen that in intermittent fasting you maintain more lean body mass and lose more fat mass compared to other diets, but she found that wasn't actually
and we saw that too. We saw there was no real evidence to prove that. So she said that lean mass may actually decrease along with fat mass. She found that quality of life was actually significantly decreased in intermittent fasting compared to calorie restricted diets. She found that adverse effects were slightly higher with intermittent fasting, and same with psychological adverse effects, also slightly higher. So actually some more negative things than positive things with intermittent fasting compared to calorie restricted diets. So anyways, that's a very quick kind of rundown of this presentation and what she found. She basically like concluded the presentation saying, it's not an effective diet based on the evidence, based on this very comprehensive review of the evidence that we have for a lot of the outcomes it's studied for. And there are actually, some negative outcomes that go along with intermittent fasting, like, the risk for disordered eating and the focus on timing rather than, diet quality. And the fact that it also hasn't been studied on, similar to this like PREDICT study, it hasn't been studied on like straight sized individuals. It hasn't when it looks at weight loss, it's studying people who have overweight or obesity. Like it's not just looking at like the thin millennial who wants to lose 10 pounds. Yeah.
Do you know what I
will say
mean?
the PREDICT study, I don't believe used overweight BMIs.
Sorry, I just meant that, like, we were saying, you know how we said that it doesn't necessarily apply to just like anyone and everyone?
Oh, yeah. Right.
That's
right.
what, sorry, that's the connection I was trying to make. Like,
Right. Okay.
that,
I see that.
you know, we there's no like definite answer that like we can just like translate intermittent fasting to everyone.
I see what you're saying. To the whole population.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Sorry. So, yeah. That's kind of a very quick rundown of that presentation and the.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just
huge.
like so.
Yeah.
As a still a fairly new dietitian, I was just so amazed and like I admired so much like how in depth this presentation was and how in depth her research was, like, you know, her literature review and
Totally.
and that's how you, just for everyone listening, like that is how you come to a conclusion about a specific diet or about a specific intervention. It's not like finding a single study that shows some sort of positive benefits and like running with it.
I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from the PREDICT study. Their findings, that confirm previous findings that individual variation between people is huge for nutrition, or at least what they said. I didn't necessarily agree that it was as massive of a discrepancy as they're saying, but that there is individual variation between people. Mm-hmm. So we can't really apply something to a whole population just because one study
exactly
said that there was this outcome.
Yeah, and it actually shows that like there is that variability between people and like between groups, that like for some people maybe intermittent fasting will have these outcomes, and for some people it won't. So she also, and I want to say this because it is important, she also said that like as dietitians, these conclusions shouldn't result in you just automatically shutting down a client when they bring up intermittent fasting. It should open up a discussion where you can, provide them with the evidence like she presented, give them what the evidence says, what the most, in-depth, comprehensive research says, and then you can kind of let that shape their decision and then like support them as best as you can based on their decision. We're not, like, as dietitians, we're not here to like say, yes, no, this is bad, do this, don't do this, like 100%. We're here to like translate the research, translate the evidence, and help like shape individually like nutrition care plans and what works best for the individual.
Totally.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that as well, because
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for summarizing all that. I guess I'm not super surprised. Like, I'm happy though.
No.
The reason I'm happy those were her conclusions is because those were a lot of the same conclusions we came to when looking at the literature. So I would have been, I guess, a little bit mortified if we had said something completely wrong on our episode.
For sure. No,
our conclusions were totally different.
It was definitely in line with what we had said in our episode. And if you want to hear that episode, it's just a couple episodes back. I don't know exactly what number, but it just really, for me, like this presentation just really nailed down what what we already knew, if not like made me a little less likely to like
support an idea,
support intermittent fasting. Exactly,
having positive outcomes.
Right. So there was actually, in a lot of these presentations, the presenters do like a poll before and after, and so the poll that she did for all the dietitians was like, what do you think, or like, how do you think intermittent fasting, or do you think intermittent fasting is effective? Something like that. And it was basically like, yes, no, not effective. And then it was like not, or like comparable to calorie restricted diets, or no different from calorie restricted diets. And I think like 82% of the dietitians said like comparable to calorie restricted diets, or no different from Yeah. And then at the end of the presentation, actually, I think still the majority said like no different, but it was like way more people had changed to not effective.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like they had changed their opinions to like intermittent fasting is not effective.
Whenever I think of intermittent fasting, I always think of Dr. Jen Gunter, who wrote the Vagina Bible. She had a tweet. She said, if you can intermittent fast, power to you, but there's no way I cannot eat breakfast or something like that. Like she talked about it. I was like, well, I mean, yeah, it's like you're saying, it's like you're not going to totally shut somebody down for wanting to try something, but I don't know, the evidence just isn't there to show that there are these amazing outcomes that people are looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all you can do is give them that and then let them make their decision. And then when they do make a decision, try and support them as best as you can to make healthy choices and eat nutritious foods. Like if someone's going to intermittent fast, you might as well like show them how they can like optimize their nutrition within their like eating window or whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. I you know, a lot of what we're learning, of course, is about how we can make the best decisions for ourselves, and maybe we're learning about the process in which healthcare professionals, including registered dietitians like yourself, come to conclusions about what different things they might recommend. So it's really crucial for healthcare professionals to stay up to date and to be giving information that aligns with evidence-based research.
Or like if it's out of so say you're a physician and someone asks you about intermittent fasting and you don't know what the most recent research is, like referring out to a dietitian who's up to date, or like you know what I mean, making those referrals to people who can give you the most up to date evidence.
So for me, it's kind of like, I know we should end, but going back to the Predict study, the thing that bothers me the most, for some reason I'm sticking to this, is like I keep coming back to it, is on the Zoe app website, how it says genes don't determine your weight, and there's no link, no citation. And in fact, when you look at the Predict study, the claim that they're actually making is that genetics don't substantially predict the metabolic outcomes that they looked at in the study, which in fact they did predict glucose outcomes pretty well. Right. So I'm so mad at that, and I just think like part of their team, they're healthcare researchers, healthcare providers, like they really shouldn't be associating themselves or like helping to create this app that is throwing out nutrition myths, and like it's so ironic that it's underneath this headline that says nutrition myths busted by our science. Anyway, I don't know, to me it's just like another thing that like contributes to or like perpetuates diet culture in a way. Like it's just like, I don't know, everyone's looking for like constantly diet culture is like looking for the next best thing that people will buy in hopes that they'll like lose weight or optimize their digestion or like whatever, boost
optimize
their metabolism,
their wellness. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, that's just so, it's like really tempting for people. They want to be the person who like, and a lot of times it's like physicians who are behind, supporting these things or coming up with those things. You remember, this is such a tangent, but those vitamins, eye vitamins.
Oh my gosh, yes.
that I shared with you. We need to make that a BS of the week. Anyways, we'll save that. We're going to save that for another episode. But basically it was like a physician who created them, and like they were just like total BS. But we're not bashing physicians. It's just like, I don't know. Sometimes, and I read this in a blog post about actually the blood type diet, it's like a lot of books, like nutrition books written by physicians, and I can name like a bunch off just like the top of my head. A lot of times they're just like total BS, and it's just like they're not staying in their lane.
And I mean, unfortunately, like the same can be said for like not just like PhD researchers, but even like what comes to mind for me is even like registered dietitians, like the bread diet, the bread for life diet or whatever it was, that was written by a dietitian with a master's degree. Yeah. It's like, why would you do this?
Right. I don't understand. I don't know. It seems like, I don't know.
I mean, healthcare professionals overall should be promoting evidence-based medicine as, that should be
but there's always going to be some that don't do that. So, yeah. All right. Let's quickly run through maybe what's been tasty this week. Why don't you tell me, Tareq?
Caitlin made biscuits.
I saw that.
And they were so for people listening, if Caitlin's listening, my sister made biscuits and they were delicious. And that's my tasty this week.
I love it. So mine is chocolate chip pancakes.
Oh, yum.
I actually had chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast this morning, and I had to make it my tasty because I just love chocolate chip pancakes. There's this one influencer that I follow. Again, she's a fashion blogger, and she has chocolate chip pancakes every morning for breakfast. And I'm like, that is like what I want for my life. Like, I need to start having chocolate chip pancakes every morning.
I know
breakfast.
saying this is gonna make it like literally it's never gonna happen again. But you know how people always say like the first pancake doesn't turn out. Like I've never had that problem.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing. I've never had that issue.
Oh, really? Okay, people, it's like a thing. People are like the first pancake's always like never turns out. Like you have to throw it away. I've never had that issue.
No, okay. I don't experience that.
Cool.
We're just like
knock on wood.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you guys found this episode as like wowing and eye-opening as we did. There's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
So maybe
literally.
I don't know, maybe I have to listen to it twice.
I will very quickly just do a shout out to @LizzieAnnaBaker on Twitter, who's a public Twitter, so I don't think she'd mind us shouting her out. She tweeted at us that we had a very quotable episode last episode. So thanks, Lizzie, Anna. And,
very quotable. Oh, I love it.
Totally go follow her on Twitter, scientist extraordinaire. Yeah, so thanks for listening.
Nice. Thanks, Lizzie.
And if you leave us a review on iTunes, we'd love that, and
we'll read it out.
We'll read it out. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yep. All right, you guys, make sure to follow us on our social media, subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, follow our YouTube channel, and we will see you guys next week.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.